Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Yes, hello again, I'm Martin Ballard and welcome to episode 64 of this podcast series and a chance to talk about pantomime set pieces and routines, and we'll also answer one of your questions.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
In the last episode, I was joined by the Scottish actor, singer and director Andrew Agnew. Don't forget, if you missed that or any of the previous episodes, you can still listen to them, and there are many more to come from one of the UK's biggest producers of pantomime and children's theatre. So this time, we're going to discuss some of pantomime's traditional and new routines, those set pieces and timeless elements from slosh and the ghost gag to song sheets and those front cloth favourites. I've been joined today by three people who know an awful lot about this. First of all, Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Performance at the Victoria and Albert Museum, founder of Panto Day, Simon Sladen.
Hi, Martin.
With more than 25 years' experience in the industry, the Copenhagen-based theatre director and writer, Janice Dunn.
Hi, everyone.
And finally, resident dame at the Hexagon in Reading, in his 21st year of pantomime, I think, the former Special Recognition Award winner from the UK Pantomime Association for the Balloon Ballet, Paul Morse.
Hello. Hi, Martin. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you all with us. And this is an interesting one. And this will mean, a trip down memory lane in some ways, but also a look forward as well in anticipation of what might come in the future. And Simon, with the history in mind, I guess some of these set pieces, if not all of them, harken right back to the early days, the Harlequinade and so on.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been consulting the big book of Panto for some of the sort of archival gems that are in there. And maybe we should begin with one of the most famous of all, which of course is Everyone Together. Oh, no, it isn't.
Oh,
yes, it is.
Oh, good. We weren't quite as warmed up as we might have been. So this is arguably one of the oldest of those wonderful sequences. And we have big pantomime stars themselves to thank for this. So many of our listeners will know of Grimaldi, the really, really famous clown that really put pantomime and comedy on the map. But his dad is who we have to thank for this. So Giuseppe Grimaldi died in 1785, but was convinced and had this apparition that the devil was coming to take him on the first Friday of a month. But unfortunately, he wasn't told by the devil on which first Friday. So he would lock himself in a room, and this sort of became well known to people that lived in the area. This got immortalized in a piece that was originally called the skeleton scene. And if you think of those haunted bedrooms where like skeletons come out or ghosts, and there's a lovely report, and I'm going to quote from it now. The report explains that in this scene, the clown depicts in a most woefully comic manner all the horror and alarm which may be supposed to seize upon a nervous person when alarmed by the vagaries of a visitant from the world of spirits. So that notion of people shouting, "It's behind you," from what I understand, naughty people that lived alongside Grimaldi also would tease him and taunt, if the devil's behind you, he's coming. I mean, that's probably one of our oldest of there, but there are so many. And of course, the influence is often from film, television, variety, or new technology as well.
Yeah, and I guess the one that has followed all the way through from the Harlequinade, which was, of course, slapstick, is the slosh scene, Janice, which is a staple of most pantomimes even today.
Yeah, and although it's becoming more common now to see pantomimes, some pantomimes without them, which I think it's an interesting way of going. I think when I started doing pantomime, if you'd have attempted to do a panto without a slosh routine, there would have been letters, as we say, or more than letters. There would have been complaints, and I think people would have wanted their money back because it is such a staple. There's old and new. It goes back as far, of course, as Lazzi, which were the short comedy routines from Commedia dell'arte. They used to have the Lazzi of the bottle, and they were, of course, the Lazzis were short comedies shown before the actual evening show. So they were shown to encourage the audience to come along and see the show. So they were extremely populist and extremely popular, and normally involved someone, somehow, often in a position of authority, being brought down a peg or two in the most kind of basic and humiliating ways often. And we followed this through, of course, with our slapsticks, where the messier someone gets or the more ridiculous the situation, the better. It's all kind of hanging on with that sense of anticipation. And often when you see a good slapstick, it's set up right from the beginning as people pull out this large plastic sheet and the audience start to giggle and the kids start to get excited as they realize basically it's going to be a great big mess. And we have the wallpapering slapstick, which is an absolute classic. And you can see amazing versions of it, of course, on the internet. I think is it Tommy Cooper and Bruce Forsyth, the London Palladium?
Norman Wisdom, I think it wasn't it? Norman Wisdom
I
and
beg
Bruce
your pardon.
Forsyth, yeah.
It is Norman Wisdom, of course, doing the wallpapering routine. I know many a person who's used that in rehearsal as a kind of prototype. So all these routines, whether it's a cake baking routine or a wallpapering routine or a water routine. So you might use a water routine, for example, on the boat in Dickinson. They all have a kind of prototype. But then, of course, what's so exciting and lovely about slapsticks is that people take them and they put their own spin on it. So you can, of course, modernize them. You make them very, very modern and put all kinds of crazy modern references into them. Or you can go for a very, very traditional, very satisfying slapstick and leading, of course, always up to the end point, which is that the payoff, which is where the big thing happens, or someone gets their big cake, or someone falls into the big bath of gunge or whatever, and then we of course have our blackout.
I mean, Paul, these are variations on a theme. It doesn't always have to be messy in a slosh sense. It can be talcum powder, it can be water, but they're all great fun, and not just because of the mess, but visually they're good to watch as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I think the audience, like Janice said, we pull out the big sheet. The audience know what's coming, that sense of the familiarity to a slosh or a slapstick routine, especially if the audience come back and see you year after year. There's a joy they find because they know what's going to happen. And that organized chaos is enjoyable to watch. And in a lot of slosh scenes, there is actually a very small amount of dialogue. It's mainly a rhyme or two, and that's it. So everyone can enjoy it, from the smallest child who perhaps doesn't quite comprehend what you're saying, but enjoys the mess and the slipping over it, to the people that like the word comedy that comes with it. And it's enjoyable to do, and you can feel that sense of anticipation from the audience as we start to reveal the props, the cake base, the plunger. A plunger starts dripping. They know what's coming, and that adds to your sense as a performer of the enjoyment to it. I mean, 46 shows in, the enjoyment does go a little bit, but but it doesn't have to be gunge. But all the ones I've ever done in all these years have always involved custard pies, water. I mean, we used to do Busy Bee for a number of years, which I don't think many people do or not allowed to do, because it's all about spitting water. Absolutely hilarious and brilliant, but that's one of the ones that have over time has been pushed to the side. But if you look at things like Laurel and Hardy, that organized chaos of their slapstick, you don't actually need, like the wallpaper routine, you don't actually need much dialogue to thoroughly get 1,000 and odd people on your side and laughing.
And very much, as we said with Harlequinade, was certainly in the early days, was very often done as a mime with very little language, because slapstick, as the silent movies prove, speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
There is this almost division, whether you go for a highly visual based piece of business where you have slosh or the marcations of being hit through noise or percussion, or you have that vamping of the underscoring, or you go for a highly textual based one which uses that verbal dexterity, if you like. So it's interesting that there's this whole wide landscape, isn't it, that plays either into or against these experiences.
Variety had an impact, of course. A lot of variety acts, speciality acts and so on started to drift into Panto, and we'll talk about the balloon ballet in a moment's time, because a lot of the acts, the speciality acts, Janice, would have actually transferred their set piece routine into the Panto, wouldn't they?
When variety was at its height, you had people touring around and doing these hugely popular, again, it comes down to being quite populist. Some people would call it lowbrow. It's not a phrase I really like, actually. I think it's very patronising. I just think because a lot of people enjoy it doesn't mean it's not worthwhile. But yes, taking these speciality moments or these acts from variety and bringing them into Panto and certain variety artists, people like Nat Jackley, people like that, started to become very popular playing games, didn't they? And I remember my family talking about their childhood and seeing a variety of different people doing games. Max Wall as well, for example, slightly grotesque in some ways, lowbrow, but extremely popular, extremely entertaining. And yeah, they're very physical. If you think of someone like Max Wall, a lot of his routine or shtick, if you like, was purely physical. He was a clown in many ways, you would say, actually, physically, but also able to transfer that into a Panto character. I think the thing about verbal and physical is quite interesting because Paul said about using the rhymes, and often people hanging on rhyme, whether it's busy bee, what have you got in the hive for me? Or whether it's something like lemon meringue, so neat and so trim, fill me, right up to the brim. It gives this a structure to the slapstick. And as we said, because anticipation is so important for slapstick, it's not, you can't just come on and throw a load of pies around. That would get tired very quickly. So it's hard for the audience to imagine that people sit ruminating over it in a rehearsal room. But of course we do, because the structure of it and the shape of it and leading up to this payoff and how we do that, the status of the characters and the change and the surprise. How do we surprise them? Okay, it's a routine with custard pies and know someone's going to get it. But how do we make it a little bit more delicious? How do we surprise them? How do we give them shock? Sometimes getting people up from the audience has the more recent years become popular as we have an element of participation. Years ago, it would have been a stooge, i.e. someone in the show. But now sometimes, I've worked on pantomimes where we've had unsuspecting members of the public brought up on stage and actually involved in the routine practically. And it became a bit sort of legendary, really. It became, oh my God, they've got someone up from the audience. And it added a whole new element of danger to the routines, which I think people, the audience really, really enjoyed. But how we keep on reinventing this, of course, it's in a much more sophisticated era and with so much material available on the internet now, comedy material. It's becoming a bigger challenge every year, I think.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed getting a man out of the audience in the middle of the slosh scene. And I think health and safety has had a big impact on that in recent years. But in terms of those speciality acts, the other thing I saw many years ago, Ken Dodd in Robinson Crusoe and the Acromaniacs were the crew on the ship, and they did a whole tumbling routine in the middle, and one of them was a double for Ken Dodd, so it looked like he was doing the tumbling as well. I remember seeing a Panto slosh scene where the comic or the dame, I can't remember which, was having a bath, and all the pipes in the bathroom started to spring leaks in various different places, which I think has also been used in the silent movies. But let's talk about the balloon ballet, Paul, because you're an award winner for that as well, of course. And that's something that seems to come and go in Panto. It's not a regular item, but when it is, it's incredibly funny, isn't it?
Yeah, the audience, that was the first time I'd ever performed the balloon ballet when we did it a couple of years ago. So, we went straight to YouTube to look at the old clips of yesteryear. And again, Max Wall, like Janice said, Max Wall was involved, the whole legs with Justin and the tights. And let's face it, men's legs and tights are funny. And it's a purely visual thing. The only word we say is balloon. There is no more speaking. It's a 15-minute routine, really, or 20 if the audience really go for it. And they really took to it. And we didn't do it last year. We did it 2 years on the trot. We didn't do it last year. We referenced it. And we got a boo. The audience booed that we hadn't. So I think we made a rod for our own back there. It's just a funny routine, and the rest of the company are on the stage at the same time, because it's generally in a ballroom scene if it's Cinderella or as a show for Abanazar and Aladdin. So the whole company's there, and they enjoy it. And if the audience see them laughing, and bearing in mind they've seen it in rehearsals, that infects the audience enjoyment of it as well, and that just allows for the corpsing and the planned corpses and the natural bits that happen. And like we said, we do sit around for quite a long time in rehearsals planning all of this, of where to fall and where to pop the balloon and when we should lose the wig. It's like a farce. It's very technical to make sure those laughs come when you need them to come. But it's a great routine. I thoroughly enjoy it. And again, we've done it now twice on the trot, and I imagine we'll do it this year. We need to find a way to do the same thing, but change it slightly so it doesn't get stale. We need to push that envelope a little bit further to change it, to keep it fresh, and that people still want to keep seeing it year on year.
It's interesting you mentioned farce, because I remember we talked about the haunted bedroom, or we mentioned it earlier on. Simon, that's something that has been very similar to farce in terms of lots of different doors, beds revolving, that sort of thing, moose's heads on the wall and so on. Some of these have been lost a little bit along the way, haven't they?
Yeah, and I think arguably that's because pantomime always expresses its willingness to survive. So it takes in whatever's popular, keeps it for as long as everybody enjoys it and loves it, and then maybe spits out and chooses something new. I mean, I think we should also acknowledge the expense of building some of these sets. So, we have those heydays when everybody's doing this, and then suddenly maybe not as many people are doing it, A, because sets are decommissioned, B, because there's not enough rehearsal time, C, because there's not as many performers skilled who know these well. And so we do see these different evolution, shall we say, of forms. You can do the ghost gag with a bench, or you can do sections of it with other big pieces of scenery. But the essence is there, as Paul and Janice have said, audience participation, playing with expectations, and then constantly giving audiences something a little bit different. And of course, pantomime in that essence as well is a great capture of what is successful and popular, things that we might not even see in other genres anymore, but pantomime has embraced it, made it its own, and brings it to the forefront. And actually many of these set pieces we see like that, coming from these other forms and being played with and evolved. And I think that is the joy, but also the intense creativity from the practitioners who think, okay, let's take the invention of radio, or the BBC 1922. Suddenly we see all these wonderful radio sequences of the dame, listening to how to do the baking, and then suddenly it gets changed to do an aerobics class, and then all hell breaks loose. Henry Marshall at the Salisbury Playhouse in the 1950s was doing 12 Days of Christmas, but it was on the first day of Christmas I saw on TV. And of course today now it's all about the gifts, and many times it's a bra that was made to hold three. So there are these nuances, these playfulness, but also this evolution that really responds to the times, the culture, the society, the technology that exists.
We've mentioned already a number of things that are always there in pantos, not necessarily every panto across the country, but you'll always find, the ghost gag, you'll always find the 12 Days of Christmas and others. But I'm going to ask you all the same question now. I'll start with you, Janice. Is there a particular set piece or routine that has been forgotten that you miss, that you'd like to see come back?
What I always like, because I like doing it, was a mummy routine. So with sarcophagi, I think is the for two sarcophaguses. So it's a kind of behind you, but it's like an extended behind you, but it's with the mummies, and they're going into the sarcophagus, and then someone else is coming out. And so it's a bit like a chase, and behind you at the same time. I remember doing them where they were a bit more elaborate. So you had time to kind of build, and you had that element of surprise, like we said, with which is really important in either a slapstick or any slapstick, whether it's a slosh routine or a slapstick. I mean, I think people still do it, but on quite a simplistic level, normally in front of a front cloth. So it's not as, if you're not using the whole space, it's kind of not as effective, and people may be coming up to the auditorium and chasing around. And of course, Corona affected all of that. We came back after Corona, but we still couldn't come into the audience, and that was, of course, very strange for pantomime. So I do miss those kind of slightly more elaborate behind you, extended routines, I always call them. And I'm hoping that kind of idea of using the whole space again for routines can come back soon.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of front cloth routines that have disappeared over the years. Stage technology means that front cloths aren't necessarily needed as much as they used to be. I don't know if anybody remembers the £5 bet gag, where it was normally the dame and the comic, and it's a trick, basically tricking the comic. I bet you £5 I can prove you're not here, and that goes on and that plays out, and there are lots of those that have disappeared. Is there a forgotten routine, Paul, that you'd like to see come back that you miss?
Yeah, well, I said earlier, I really, really enjoyed Busy Bee. And I did that for years and years, and then it just vanished. And I think it's because of the whole water and spraying it from your mouth type thing. Not that you spit it in people's face and all that, but people think you do, and so they don't want that passed on to children. However, the routine of Busy Bee was fantastic, genuinely funny for the performers to do, but for the audience. And when you're going off in the wing to take that next slurp of water, you can just hear the audience becoming more and more uncontrollable with their laughter, which is just lovely. And for that one scene, the sort of the panto in a way goes out of the window. Everyone's sharing that moment of organized chaos and anarchy together, and everyone's in on the joke, and the audience can make you laugh. And I really, really enjoy that. And I don't think we'll really see Busy Bee coming back anytime soon, purely because of the way things have gone with health and safety and that sort of thing. But that was always a great routine, and I absolutely loved it.
Yeah, there's another one similar in a way with a rhyme that I don't think I've seen for many years, and it was traditionally called the egg gag, because the comic, I think, would start off by saying the rhyme: "Dear little birdie in the tree, dear little birdie flying free, dear little birdie, I love thee, won't you send some love to me?" And at that point, an egg falls down and smashes on his head, and it's played out over the scene. So it's a trick, rather like the £5 bet, and that's not done as often anymore. I don't think I've seen that for many years. Simon, is there one that you missed that you'd like to see coming back?
Oh gosh, I mean, I do love those ones which have a bit of stage trickery in them, like Tree of Truth. I mean, I'd love to bring the Woof-and-Puffs back from extinction. I've only seen 2 examples in my many years of pantomime going. These are the small little fluffy creatures that suddenly pop up somewhere in the scenery, and then all of a sudden they're at the other end, or they're coming up through a trap, or they go all across the proscenium arch and down, or might then suddenly appear in the audience. Think of a whack-a-mole, but in 3D as they come and you try and trace them. I'd also love to see a wonderful sequence that was done in Scottish pantomime, the sort of 1920s, 30s, which was the dame finishing for the day in the shop and closing all the blinds. And as she was pulling them down, they kept being naughty and flinging back up. So she's trying with her foot to hold one down. One of them pulls her up completely, and just this wonderful display of physicality and anarchy, which is at the heart of so many of those sequences.
Now, Janice, there's also something that I really love, and again, it's not always done, but I love. We talked about set pieces and routines that slot in and out of panto, but I like the running theme routines. Where the dame or the comic might come out at the opening spot and put a plant down at the pros, and it has to be watered all the way through the panto to grow, or in a similar way, a present for Cinderella, tell me if anybody goes near it. And there's always a surprise at the end of the show with that present. I love those. Do you?
Yeah, running any form of running gags is really important, actually, in the panto. That you have I think of them like little anchors, things that hopefully you can come back to, and they're linked to the plot. And I think that's the difference between. We were just talking about some slapsticks are almost like standalone. Like you go, Busy. We talk about them as standalone things. Busy Bee, the balloon ballet, you can take them from one and put in another. But the thing about interweaving these running gags is that they nearly always link to the story. So, for example, in Cinderella, I've done Cinderella again with Ian Lockham and Will Brenton, where we had the growing plant. And it was, if anyone went near it, the audience had to shout, "Not the pot." And then buttons would run out. And then eventually this beautiful flower grew on it, and he gave it to her. And then, of course, declared his love and was then rejected. And we have that really big, important moment at the end of Act 1. and it was all interwoven, and they're very nice. I think they're very satisfying for the audience because they've got the visual element, but also it's a part of the story. And I think if you could do those kind of things, I think that they're also really nice, really satisfying for the public.
Paul, over the years, new routines and set pieces have come in and out of Panto. UV scenes, of course, were a staple for a number of years. They've sort of almost disappeared now. 3D sequences came in. The Belgrade, Janice will know, Ian and Will did a scratch and sniff Panto with scratch cards for the audience. I mean, lots of these things have come and gone, haven't they, Paul? But the one thing that stayed, and he's as popular as ever, maybe you can tell me why, is the song sheet.
Yeah, the song sheet is a good bit of communal singing, and the whole audience joins in together, from the old to the young, and it's the first, again, as a front cloth piece generally at the end of the show. It's the way the audience can then interact with the person leading the song sheet, be it the celebrity of the show or the dame. And again, that's when the pantos a little bit goes out of the window, and you're just all sharing in that moment together. And let's face it, when we bring children up and get them involved in sometimes what can be a tricky song, the comedy naturally comes. And I think everyone enjoys that, and everyone enjoys the community aspect of singing a familiar song. Also, as performers, it's hugely important because we're generally covering a huge change on stage for everyone to get ready for the walk down. But I know I really do enjoy a song sheet. And John Clegg, who you might know is a comic, we used to do a song sheet together when I was first at Reading, at split stage, and that was just lovely that he would speak to the child and offer the child the microphone to respond, and I would do obviously a very deep voice. Well, that could go back and forth for ages with the audience, and the mums and dads thoroughly enjoy it. And it's just another way of having that comedy right to the very end before we go into the finale walk down.
And Simon, what about the future? What do you think we might see that we've never seen before? What sort of routines and set pieces might be introduced now that can be traditional for the next 20, 30 years?
Well, it's a very good question, isn't it? I think I would say let's turn to technology. You know, we've acknowledged radio. I remember when we all were the red button came on BBC, and there were pantos which had a magical remote control which allowed you to speed things up or replay a moment. We've already seen cameras being used to single people out in the audience for a bit of participation pre-show or during show to find the dame a boyfriend. I don't think it'll be too long before we start seeing drone cam in places, you know, that technology there very much. But I think as far as we look forward and that embracing of technology, maybe apps coming in to provide things that might go onto the stage, or words or jokes or pictures, you know, whole groups like that. We probably see a revival of some of the more simple pieces because they're the very heart of pantomime. And as much as we go for technology, we want to get away from that at times. We want to be reminded of that joy of anarchy, of that movement, of that physicality, and of that textual-based intricacies. You know, we're seeing tongue twisters coming back.
We will certainly see more innovation in the future. We've seen innovation for the history of pantomime, you know, going back to Greek and Roman times, and there's plenty of room for innovation in the future as well. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been fascinating hearing your views, comments and memories about traditional pantomime set pieces and routines. Paul Morse, Janice Dunn and Simon Sladen, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks very much, Martin.
And finally, don't forget, if you have any questions about Imagine Theatre or anything at all to do with pantomime, send it to us via the Get in Touch section of the website at imaginetheatre.co.uk. That is what Carl Hughes has done. He says professional pantomime has all the glitz and the glam, big songs, big sets, the best costumes and scripts, and of course, the best casts and crew at the very best venues. But what is the one thing that amateur pantos have that the big pantomime producers don't? And he says he's talking about the local pantos in towns and villages, in their community halls and clubs. So who better to answer that than somebody who started in amateur theatre, Imagine joint CEO and managing director Steve Bowden.
Amateur and community pantomime is able to offer loads of opportunities that potentially we as professional producers struggle to achieve. For example, they have access to much larger companies because they're not paying wages for all the performers and people who work on the show. Plenty more people can get involved, and they can provide opportunities for all volunteers from all walks of life. You know, you can work with engineers and creatives and designers, and people from different backgrounds bring different skills to amateur theatre, and that's one of the great strengths of it. One of the other things that it does is provides experience and access to education and career development. There are plenty of people who I know working in the industry, including myself and a lot of my fellow colleagues at Imagine Theatre, whose first introduction to pantomime was through an amateur theatre level. And it provides a great opportunity to experience theatre production. And many people then step from that into training. And even if they don't train, they always have a love of theatre that stays with them for life. And of course, the other element is the affordability. Amateur and community pantomimes is able to set ticket prices significantly lower than professional productions because their overheads are lower. And that in turn generates opportunities for audience members who perhaps simply can't afford to go to their professional pantos in towns and cities and will go and support their local productions instead. So amateur and community pantomime is such an important part of theatre production at Christmas in the UK. And actually, there are thousands more productions in amateur theatres, village halls, community centres than there are professional productions. And long may that continue.
Thank you, Steve. Keep your questions coming and make sure you join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 65 and the next in our occasional series looking at the popular pantomime titles. And this time it's the turn of Peter Pan.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.